Hi. Today I want to talk about books that are a little difficult in regards to the themes and the things that they talk about. Not exactly that they're not difficult to read, they're quite simple to read, but the themes that they talk about are um, quite deep and sometimes also uncomfortable. I, as a reader, found these things a little uncomfortable, so that's what I want to talk about with you today. For some reason, I looked whitewashed because of the sun from my window, but anyway, the first book that I have picked up is Sayaka Murata's Life Ceremony. This is a collection of short stories published in 2022. This book is essentially very much Sayaka Murata. The last book, I think I've also reviewed this book in the channel, her previous book, The Convenience Store Woman. It is exactly, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it has those elements of Sayaka Murata's writing. Of course, it is translated from Japanese, so maybe some things might get lost in translation. But anyway, so this is a collection of short stories. I want to talk about actually 3 or 4 of these short stories that stood out for me. The themes of this novel, if you can see the cover of this novel, it sort of is like there's food in it, but also you can see a human heart here. So food, the topics, taboo topics are dealt in this book, and what I found interesting was that some of the things that she talks about in these stories do make the reader uncomfortable, but also at the back of your head you sort of tell yourself that okay, this is just a piece of fiction, it's not real. So you sort of distance yourself from the themes that she talks about. I took some time to read actually the first few chapters, first 2-3 chapters. I took some time to read them because I found the things that she talks about uncomfortable. Not that these are bad stories. These are really beautiful stories actually. So the first story is called A First-Rate Material, where we live in a world where it is okay to use human bodily parts after somebody passes away. So for example, it's sort of a reward, and people pride themselves in either buying human products or being products when after they are dead. So this first story deals with that. For example, there are lampshades which are made of human skin. People are wearing coats made of human hair, so things like that. So I did get a little uncomfortable, but that was it. But it was a beautiful story nonetheless. The second, I think this was one of the most beautiful stories that I found. It's called A Summer Night's Kiss, where these two best friends, this is very short, it's actually a 4-page short story, and A Summer Night's Kiss is about this woman who has never experienced any sexual interaction, and so she has a best friend, and these women are past their middle ages. They're old, quote unquote old, and it's about this fruit that this old woman eats, which resembles a kiss, a first kiss. So I found that really beautiful. It was written in a very gentle and beautiful way. The second story is Two's Family. This is an extension of this Summer Night's Kiss. So it's about these two women, two best friends living together and sharing lives and raising a family. They are not sexually related, but they are just friends who live together, and it's portrayed in a very beautiful way, how you don't have to be related by blood or have to be quote unquote a heteronormative unit to be considered a family. So I found these two stories very beautiful. The other story, which is the Life Ceremony, the title story, is about, again, I found it uncomfortable because so it talks about cannibalism. I've been reading too much about cannibalism lately, but anyway, so this talks about how after one person dies, it is okay to, they don't have funerals. After one passes away, they don't have funerals, they have life ceremonies where you celebrate the life of the human that died by eating the flesh, by cooking the flesh of that human that has passed away and eating that flesh. And also in the ceremony, in life ceremony, people find partners to procreate and take life forward. So rather than mourning the loss of the person who has passed away, you eat the flesh. I mean, the book, the story, the characters eat the flesh of the person that has passed away, and then they go on to procreate. So it's also talks about how the population rate is going down, and so people don't look at sex as anything pleasurable. So, and it's also for some bizarre reason, it's also nationalistic. Since the population is going down, it's considered a nationalistic move to procreate rather than to have sex for pleasure. So that was very interesting, the story, the title story. So this is, I would highly recommend Saiga Murata's story. These are just some of the stories that I have just given spoilers to, I guess. But these are the stories that stood out to me. There are, I guess, 12 stories in this collection. So I just wanted to give you a brief of what you will get into if you want to pick up this collection. The next book that I want to talk about is the story on Sri Lankan Civil War, set during the time of Sri Lankan Civil War, Anil's Ghost by Michael Ondaatje. This was published in 2002. This book was actually a part of one of my courses called Trauma Theory. So of course it does deal with the traumatic events of the Sri Lankan Civil War, the prolonged war, and how people suffered. So the protagonist of the novel is Anil, who was born in Sri Lanka, but then she moved abroad, and then she lives in America, and how then she comes back to work as a forensic scientist to Sri Lanka during the war, to quote unquote save her people. So this story deals with, of course, a lot. It talks about trauma, it talks about war, it talks about the ravages of war, how common people suffer during war, and how people are silenced. But one interesting thing, and this was the topic that I worked on for my paper as well, was that I don't know if it is a male author versus female author thing or whatever, but Ondaatje completely did not look at the gendered perspective, especially during a war. If you are talking about war, you cannot not talk about sexual and gendered violence, and this book completely dismisses that aspect of a war. Maybe he didn't want to deal with it, or I don't know, but it was quite surprising since the protagonist is a woman, and statistically speaking, during wars, gendered crimes are they just shoot up. So that was actually that was the paper that I actually wrote for my class, the absence of gendered violence in this book. So yeah, there are a few things, a few lines that are very beautifully written. I did not, again, enjoy reading it, but since it was part of my course, I had to read it. I will recommend it to people who want to read about the Sri Lankan Civil War, but also, Ondaatje he's a Sri Lankan Canadian writer, so he moved to Canada early on in his life. So it does again feel like very much like an outsider's perspective personally for me. It's not necessary that you have to be suffering in that country to write about that country, but for some reason there were a few things where I felt that it was the gaze of an outsider. Anyway, that's just my personal opinion. If somebody wants to read on Sri Lankan Civil War, if somebody wants to read on trauma and violence, this is a great book to pick up. Of course, nobody is going to voluntarily pick up books on violence, but this is a great read. I'm also reading another book on Sri Lankan civil war. So yeah, the next book is I want to talk about is my children's children by Cindy Magona. So I bought a second-hand copy, so, and it has this weird tape here. So anyway, this was published in 1998. 1998. This is an autobiography set during apartheid's South Africa, and during the time of apartheid. This, of course, again deals with traumatic incidences related to class, related to poverty, related to gender. Especially, the author Magona talks about growing up in Africa as a black woman who had to face a lot of problems in her life. This is actually quite an inspiring story where Magona actually writes about her life of being born in a poverty-stricken family, of course, in South Africa, being black in South Africa, what it meant during the apartheid. She also talks about her personal struggles of her, pregnancy before wedlock, and then her husband leaving her, and then how she had to raise all her kids by herself, and her struggles at her job being a teacher. And yes, and especially it's quite moving, and it's also beautiful, and it's also, in some parts, it's also horrific. And of course, this is based on true events, so you also have a lot of sympathy for the author and the characters or the people in the book. So yes, so if somebody wants to read South African literatures, and I would recommend this book. This is a treasure trove, especially if you want to read books by female authors in South Africa. This, I think, is a beautiful memoir, a beautiful autobiography by Magona. So when we are reading books about events that have actually happened in real life, it sometimes can be a little difficult. If it's very fictitious, if it's based on a fantasy land, you can sort of sometimes distance yourself from that fictitious world and your real world, but it becomes a little psychologically difficult, especially for me. I feel personally, for me, I find reading a book an emotional experience, specifically if it has themes of violence and trauma and gender-based violence and inequality, any sort of experiences of inequality and injustice. So yeah, I want to read books which will be light, which will not ruin my mental state of being, but I guess I end up reading these very powerful stories of real people, of real suffering, sometimes garbed in fiction, but nonetheless, I love intricate stories, and I guess trauma and conflicts are a part of these stories. So I don't think anybody can avoid that, and especially we live in a time when wars are not fiction. They are happening around us, and they are part of us, part of our being, and literature just is a tool for us to maybe cope with the reality of the world, either if we are writing or even if we are reading. So yeah, the next book that I want to talk about is Freshwater. This is a book by Enquiry. This was published in 2018. Again, this book, this author, Emezi, is Nigerian author based in America, I guess now. They also have Sri Lankan roots. So this book again talks about Igbo ontology. There are a lot of first of all, I found it a little, like, first few pages of the book, I found it a little confusing because I was just getting used to the pace of the novel. So this, of course, deal with Igbo ontology, the concept of Obanje, a being, not, it's neither human nor a spirit. So this Obanje is a being which has two foots in the real world and in the spiritual world. I'm not very I'm not an expert on that, but this book talks about the protagonist of the not the movie, the book. Ada is considered an Obanje, and so this book, of course, deals with trauma. It deals with gendered violence. It deals with child abuse. It also talks about the gender identity, the confusion of gender identity and sexual orientation. So yeah, this was a very interesting read, quite deep, and again, this was a part of actually one of my courses, so I had to read it very quickly, but I would love to reread Freshwater because of the kind of themes that it deals with. It deals with this character who is coming in terms with all her selves, all her different selves, all her emotional being. It talks about this character who has different, not exactly personalities, but I guess this is with everyone, not just this one particular character in this book, but we all have parts of ourselves which are guised in a lot of different forms, and how do we deal with those different forms of ourselves. So Freshwater is a book that deals with this character who is coming to terms with these all of her different personalities, different aspects of herself. There's also a lot of talk about mental health and the importance of tuning in with taking care of our mental health. So yeah, so these are some of the difficult books that I have read, not very recently actually. Some of them, only Murata's book I have read it very recently, last month. So yeah, these are some of the books that you can check them out if you would like. And I am currently reading another novel on Sri Lankan Civil War called The Seven Moons of Mali. Almeida, I think I talked about it in one of my previous videos, but anyway, currently I'm reading that, and then I would want to read actually something lighter, so let's just hope I stumble upon. I do have like this pile of books that I want to read by my bedside, and then I have another pile by my desk, on my desk actually. So I would like to read something light and maybe something nonsense, not very dramatic or not very deep, but yeah, let's see. Thanks for watching till the end. I hope to see you next time.